First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we stand, past, present and emerging. And with that, when I say that, I always like to consider and express my great gratitude to the stories that have been passed on. Unfortunately not enough yet, and I'm hoping that it will be much more in the future. I was very fortunate to be living in Brisbane when Maurice Ortega, Camilla Berkland, Marion Drew, Ray Cook, Jay Younger, I believe, started the Queensland Centre for Photography in 2004. So what we see here is a small glimpse of a 10-year celebration of photography in Australia. I'm saying Australia because there are quite a few artists here that were not from Queensland, as it later became, as Queensland Centre of Photography, QCP, grew. But in the beginning it was set up as a platform for Queensland photographic artists. Now again, when I would say photographic, we need to think of the word photographic in a very broad spectrum. It's a platform where artists work with the medium of photography, but not necessarily only with the medium of photography. And the medium of photography in all its form. So it could be a work that is created on Photoshop or darkroom techniques, or the combination of the two, or cutting and pasting, drawing onto the photographs, painting onto the photographs. Anything was possible. So that's really one of the premises that they set from the beginning, to look at contemporary photography and experimental photography. So that's really what was one of the main drives. Now if we look at that, we look at the history of photography, of course we come back to the history of art in general. We look at landscape, we look at still lifes, we look at portraiture. They were really the three main streams, and for those, in terms of the history, portraiture is really where it mainly started. You had a portrait, and around the portrait, as in terms of complete art, you would have maybe a few items that were on the table in front of the person that was being painted, and you had a landscape behind it. But all of that told you stories about that person, and then slowly they separated. Slowly you had more of a still life painting, and you had a landscape. But in the past, it was just one. Landscape was part of the portrait that was painted, or it would have been a indoor setting. So here, the closest representation to that idea of the still life painting is, and you probably saw it as you walked in, is one of the founding members of the Queensland Centre of Photography, Marion Drew, much loved friend of mine and a fantastic artist, and one of the best known photographic artists in Queensland at the moment. So Marion Drew's work looks at that idea, the history of still life. The German artists, how they used still life in their paintings, but then she looked at the idea of dead animals in Australia, native animals in Australia, that she placed on the table. The background that you see in the works is often based on the landscape where she would have found the animals, or where the animals would have lived. I'm just going to pedal a little bit about that, because it really talks much more about the traditional way of photography, but at the same time it doesn't. Because if you look at a lot of these still life paintings in the past, they were much more based on the idea of wealth. So if you were a musician and you had money to paint, to have a painter paint a still life for you, then it may have an instrument in there, or a sheet of music notes. Or if you were a well-traveled person and you had recently come back or you were trading with Japan, there might be a really beautiful porcelain cup in there. But if you're also trading with South America, then in that beautiful porcelain cup may have been some hot chocolate. So those beautiful combinations. So when you look at these paintings, it's not just a beautiful still life painting, it told you something about the person who it was painted for, or the person that commissioned the artist. Now in Marion Drew's, she's putting much more of her own thoughts about still life and history into the work. So it's an ongoing aspect of that genre, if you like. Now, when you look at the collection of the Queensland Centre of Photography, keep in mind it's 10 years, 2004 to 2014. So if you look at it now, or if you look at it in the future, because yes, you can look at this in the future, because it will be part of the collection here, this entire set of 108 works. We are really excited the fact that it is become part of the collection here, of an amazing new building that you're about to have, which is extremely exciting. When a few years ago, a year ago only, actually even less, I think, we talked about the building, and I saw the site, and I knew that we still had this collection that needed to find a home. It was just really wonderful to finally have that happen and have the result of the first showing of that here at the moment. But always think of the time, and that's with every artwork. I suppose we need to look at, okay, when was this artwork created? What was the time? What happened? Now, one of the reasons I'm saying that to you as well is like this show is what's hanging here is pretty good in terms of it's 1/3 of the artists represented in this is female, and 2/3 is male. It should be 50-50. Okay, but we have to keep in mind that if we look at the collection, you'll find that the majority of it is also male. So I would say the ratio is probably about the same. Now, if you were to curate an exhibition now or collection, then it would, well, I would like to think that it would be one of the things that you keep in mind, that you have a collection that is much more based on equality of all. Now, I'm not saying that Maurice and Camilla didn't think of that. If we look at the people that were employed there, that equality was always there, it was quite really beautiful to see that, and they really pushed that as well. Queensland Centre of Photography became one of those community centres, one of those community places where people would go to not only look at art, but have that drink and talk with each other, to get ideas, to work together on projects. So they started off in Bulimba, just over the river, from the old wool stores just off. Actually, it wasn't Oxford. Anyone been to Bulimba? Just off Oxford Street. Oxford Street. Yeah. So it was a warehouse, a small warehouse that they converted to the centre. There's some crazy parties that happened there, which was fantastic. One of them ended up in it was a wrestling party, but in jelly that happened at the front, and then someone complained, but somehow they knew that the person complained, so they quickly cleaned everything up, and they had only just finished cleaning up. This was very late in the night, and then police came. It's like, I'm not sure what you're talking about here. So it was quite funny, some of those parties. But I think that the most important part of being part of that community was that dialogue between artists, and between everything was possible, and so. There was this really healthy competition between the artists that was there to push further, to see to be part of a group where Marion Drew was part of, Ray Cook, already quite established artists in the industry. And to be part of that, to be able to have conversations like that, it definitely pushed me as an artist into a very different world. When I started my photography, I started as a documentary photographer, and I wasn't quite sure how I fitted in that world, but slowly I became part of that world. as an artist. And of course there's always that line between, well, there isn't anymore, but between people say art and photography, and then they say photography, art photography and documentary photography. It's all art. Everything is art. So so the works that you see here, they vary between most of this self-expression. They vary between traditional photography combined with historical photographs, stories of the past, but most of it is conceptual driven. So concept comes first, and then the rest. So that is pretty much all of the work you see here is conceptually driven. So really looking at contemporary art form rather than photographic as photographic practice. Now, I'm saying that, but not undermining the idea of technique. If we look at these works, they're all artists that have worked within that technique or have developed that technique and most of them are still practicing. So you have, if we look at Ray Cook's The Elephant there, so it is a darkroom print, silver gelatin print, and then he hand toned it with a brush. So it is that process that he worked with. Camilla Berkland, a beautiful setup of the work there. So Camilla Berkland was Maurice Ortega, which we have here, standing in the middle, pointing at us. That is the director, was the director of the Queensland Centre of Photography. Camilla Berkland, his wife, was the artist of that work. The person standing on the right here with the glasses, that's Ray Cook, who made the work of the elephant, and Gia is standing on the side there. It's idea. So they started off, Maurice and Camilla started off with organizing, getting a place together for Queensland artists. Now very soon he started thinking further. I mean, Maurice, he's Mexican. And it was quite funny to have him work with all the people. Most of the artists came from the Queensland College of Art from the photography department. Maurice and Camilla both used to teach there. Of course, Marion Drew used to teach there. Jay Younger used to teach there. Do we have a Jay Younger? No. He used to teach there. I know that there is a Nathan Coram of the work. He used to teach at the college. Ray Cook used to teach at the college. Who else? Alex Perry, who's the reclining female photograph there. She used to work for as an administrator, but most of partly paid, partly volunteer. She now works for the Museum of Brisbane. And there is also work by Martin Smith, I believe, in the collection. He still teaches at Queensland College of Art as well. So they were very much connected to that. Now the collection that you see here was a combination, or it kind of happened in the combination of two things. The majority of it, the works, they were directly donated by the artists. There's two works in the collection of me, and that's, yeah. So yeah, I had a show at the gallery, and the amount of things that they did for me as an artist, I appreciated that. And Maurice was quite forward with asking about it too. Would you like to donate this particular work to the collection? And it's like, and at first it was, I'm not sure how many artists are here, but I think as an artist you think, well, that cost me a lot of money, and that frame around it, that cost me about $800. And it's like, so what am I going to do? But at the same time, if your work is then part of the collection, then you can put it on the CV, and if that organization is indeed doing a lot of work for you, then it's absolutely worth it. Now, especially now if we look at this, it's a 10-year looking back at the Queensland Centre of Photography is going into the history of the organisation, and it's only because of all those collections that the work stands very strongly as a body of work. Without that, it just wouldn't. We're leaving a legacy behind for an organization that lasted 10 years. And sure, unfortunately, it was only 10 years, but I like to think of it the other way around. It's like 10 years is a long time. Any business that can continue to go for 10 years, that's a long time. For a director to be working on a project in a gallery or in a business is a long time. I don't think there's many of us, maybe more in the past, that stay in the same job for 10 years. So if we're thinking of it in that way, the QCP grew from a small place that was in Bulimba to a organization that organized 3 photography festivals that went around Queensland. So different venues were part of it, and I think there was 1 or 2 like more like a conference where you came together and we talked about art, but I think it was only 1 or 2. And the publications, so several publications that they printed. We had shows in Melbourne, in Adelaide, in Sydney a few times, and the Queensland Centre of Photography also started going to photography fairs, and mainly Photo LA. So they went to Photo LA 5 times. And from that, some of the things that happened from that, Marion Drew is part of the Getty Museum, now I can't think of the. I know, and 3 artists were picked up by the Getty. So the Getty, Lekma. No, sorry, one by Marion Drew by the Getty, and 3 by Lekma, Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Now I'm not sure if you've been in LA, but they are massive institutions. Like we're talking about, Lekma is an institution that's probably about 3 times the NGV. So that's how big that organization is. So it's a very, very big collection. Chris Bowes, which I think is part of the collection as well, has one work in that collection. I know I can see the female artist in front of me, but I can't think of her name now. And the other artist that's part of it is myself. And they picked 2 of my works. So to be part of that collection is really quite amazing. And that came through Queensland Centre of Photography. If they hadn't gone to LA, that wouldn't have happened. The collection, actually Mark Kimber sold a work to the Hells Angels, like the guy who started Hells Angels. So it's really like those beautiful connections that you make was really quite.
Too scared not to sell to them.
Well, that's right. That's right. Yeah, but it was one of those places too that after hours, Leonardo DiCaprio. So, came through the space, and sometimes he selected works that he bought. I don't think from our booth, but that's the type of people that you see through that. Andy Stewart, I believe it's Andy Stewart from the Police, the guitarist or drummer. Any Police fans here? He came through, but he's also a photographic artist. So there was all those type of people that walked through, and then through that process, too, a few of the artists also got picked up by commercial artists, commercial galleries, like Kim de Muth. Kim de Muth and myself, we both are represented by a gallery in Germany, Kunstkomplex. So those are the things that kind of happened because it created a platform for us to do so. They were a voice for us they would carry our art as a voice to other people, and it's been a wonderful 10 years. And unfortunately, after 10 years, the Newman government stopped funding the arts. And that was one of the reasons, that was the main reason that they couldn't continue. I was only a board member of the last 3 years for the organization, but it was, I learned a lot, I have to say, through that process. But I think that's the most important part, it was a community, and we worked together as a community, and we didn't, it was a very healthy competition. And if someone got through, then we applauded that all together. It wasn't like, I don't feel there was, well, definitely not something that I saw. It was a very healthy organization, and we support it. And never got any. I'm proud to have been part of that.
And so we're in a really interesting time, I think, Rockhampton. I'm keen to know, 2004, Brisbane, Queensland, what was the drive behind starting QCP? What was the thinking? Is it that the Australian Centre for Photography existed and we didn't have a photographic voice in Queensland? How did it come from its very sort of concept idea, and how did Maurice materialise that?
I have to speculate most of that, but if we look at 2004, indeed you had this, the Australian Centre of Photography. So Maurice and Camilla, Marion Drew, Ray Cook, Jay Younger, they were all working at QCP, and there weren't any galleries that supported their art practice. So wherever they had to go, they always had to go hire a space or do it at the gallery, at the university gallery. But that university gallery often also was open for a lot of other artists, but wouldn't be able to serve the breadth of photography. They came out of QCA. So they needed to create a space, and a space that would push people to. There's one thing about, and that Maurice always looked at, what after university. As a student, what do you do after university? What is your platform? Where can you show work? And it doesn't matter, it's not only university, it's also when you do other courses. Where do you go? What do you do after this? So Maurice and Camilla and the foundation of QCP, they created a space for people to continue, and for people to continue to share the love and passion for photographic art practice. And that's kind of really what they started and where it went to. Yeah.
And getting a space and starting it to happen.
Who's going to paint the walls? Yes.
Baby steps. Yeah.
Baby steps.
There's a lot of people here who represent Walter Reed artists, so I think we're fortunate that the community here has galleries, has studios. But if you didn't have that, how did QCP come about physically?
I think I don't know what the first steps were when they did it. The reason I don't know was because I was overseas. I wasn't in Brisbane. I was doing an artist in residency in Estonia, and there's one work of that in the collection. There's books here too on that. I feel like I'm promoting my own work here, but I was part of it, I suppose. Still am. So I don't know how they got the financial aspect together and how they started. Maurice and Camilla lived in Bulimba, so the area was well known to them. For them to then find a space that was suitable. Yeah.
And then funding, and then artists, and so obviously they were the nucleus behind the activity, and it flowed from them.
Yep. I mean, they always had sponsors. They looked at sponsorship. They had sponsorship through Griffith University. They had Brisbane Digital Imaging. Martin Berry did a lot of the printing for the artists, and it was always at a discounted rate. There was quite a few organisations that really supported QCP, and they had, of course, government funding. There was always government funding for the first few years, and then also applying for other funds, like every other arts organisation that you have to do. But I think it was, it's knowing what you need to tap into in terms of what is the government looking for, or what is the education world looking for, and to make sure you tap into all those parts. Saying that, I think Maurice became part of the Lions Club because he knew there would be people with money there, so they would then come to QCP to buy work, and so those type of things. But then we also had a healthy group of people that were art lovers, and that also had money, so they would buy the occasional artwork, and Maurice would also help people to buy artwork. I actually can remember a few of, at those days, at the QCA, they had the art auctions, and the money would go to the end of the year exhibitions. And some of those works you saw there, it was like, oh, and it was quite interesting to be in that space. And Maurice would either put bids in for some of the collectors if they couldn't make it. Yeah, Dale Hewson was pretty one of the people that was a regular face and an absolutely lovely man. And he has a very substantial collection of Queensland photographic art, larger than this. But a lovely man, lovely, and it was really good to have him and his way of looking at art as well. So, but yeah, it was a great place to actually buy art. I remember one time Maurice was bidding for someone, and it wasn't Mary and Drew. But the artwork was artwork that was created in the Powerhouse, Brisbane Powerhouse, before it became the Powerhouse.
You have that one in the collection?
You have that one in the collection with the lines up. So I've got another one's version of it too, because I was bidding against Maurice. And at one stage I looked at Maurice like, I'm gonna get this. And I did. I think he realized. But it was this beautiful thing that we shared. And yeah, I think the main part about any organization is be upfront and yeah, know what your aim is, know what your goals are, and then go forth with that.
Probably worth joining in on the conversation. We have some representatives from the photography, from the printmakers, from the contemporary artists. So I guess, yeah, multiple hats running individual practices, and then also artist run spaces as well. So Henri's here if you have any ideas or thoughts about QCP.
Henri, as well as a display space, did they have equipment and resources that artists, and especially emerging photographers, could access at the centre as well, or was it primarily to promote the finished product?
Yeah, primarily to promote the finished product. But if you were applying for a grant and you wanted to run it past them, absolutely, they would be there, and they would also give you letters of support. But that was also because their affiliation with the Queensland with the Queensland College of Art was so close that often most artists would go there to get that done. Yeah. And of course, artists from other universities were also involved with the centre, but it was mainly most artists came from the Queensland College of Art. Kim de Muth came from QET, and then there was also some artists that Peter Mills did. He was actually lecturing at UQ Art Museum at UQ. And so yeah, but there was always that overlay. So we had a very strong connection with other universities where they could then go and work with. Yeah.
So you mentioned that there was quite a lot of dialogue between the artists.
Yeah.
Where did that occur? If it wasn't a workshop situation so much as in a place where you could make work. So did you just do that in the gallery? In the
gallery, opening nights, but also for those that were working at university, in the corridors of university, having lunch, and all those places.
Sort of impromptu.
Yeah, but we also had. There were some dinners involved as well, but yeah, that was limited. I would have liked to see much more of that, but that's saying that now. Then it was different. I think there is a big difference between our situation now to the past. When everything is rosy, when everything goes really well, we all sit very comfortable within our own environment and create. Whereas when times are tougher, we tend to look more at each other and help each other. And I mean, last time I was here, Bianca showed me the beautiful space that you've called a 4-story building of all art forms. But one of the first things that came to my mind, why are they all boxed into their own little environment? Why are they not working together? Imagine doing collaboration works with all different artists. Look, to me, like, I would want to do all of it. Every single floor, I would want to do everything. But it's one of those things. But that's me saying that, actually, which is actually funny that I'm saying that, because I'm a one-trick pony with my art practice. I do one thing and that's it. But the idea of being able to do so much. But I suppose that probably comes from, and I think that's, I also come from an art teaching background. I did do some teaching at QCA as well as QET. So to be surrounded by students and have them come to you with ideas and brainstorm with them, that constant firing of ideas at each other is also something that continued with QCP, and it was so wonderful. Like, I would come back from the openings at QCP and completely, either my mind would be completely like, oh, what's the next thing I can do? Or I would be completely exhausted because I gave my all my energy to everyone else. But it was wonderful. It was wonderful to be in that position and to do that. And it's like, I think it's something that I still do now. I can't, when I'm sitting down and listening to people with their ideas, I can't stop thinking about, oh, have they done this? What about that? Have they thought of this? And yeah, constantly. And I think it's a wonderful, to me, that creative dialogue, that if that's missing, then why have an organization?
So I'm interested in closing off with a question saying, through the QCP collection and the activity that it did in Brisbane, in that 10 years, what was a standout opportunity for engaging through art that it supported?
So engaging through art in Brisbane, or what it's overall supported?
Yeah. What was, I guess, its core premise was art.
Yeah.
So what was the best, the most memorable engagement outcome that stands with you that was a success of QCP?
Wrestling might be up there.
Yes, the wrestling was up there. Yeah, I wasn't part of the. It must have been when I was in 2004. When I was, I would have joined them in. Yeah, I would have joined. I think the Queensland Festival of Photography was probably the standout, and part of that too was that 3 people would travel to different parts in Queensland, and people could come with their portfolio, and we would discuss portfolio. It was always two from the centre and then the artists. So it was a really beautiful dialogue, and it was also really good because sometimes the other person didn't agree with that person, and we also said that. And it wasn't about agreeing; it was about getting different perspectives on your work, and it was quite clever with that too, because from that too, some of those artists were then able to come to Brisbane to have a show in Brisbane. So it was that continuation of that as well. So the premise really was to create a centre of Queensland photography, and to put Queensland photography on the map. And I think it did that. I really think that it's that whole thing. It's like when you live in a small country town, then you look up to Rockhampton. If you live in Rockhampton, you may look up to Brisbane. When you live in Brisbane, you look up to Sydney and Melbourne. And I mean, I don't know why, but that's something that people do. But it's also the other way around, where people in those centres think, oh, they only live in Brisbane, what would they know? Like as in Melbourne and Sydney. So a lot of artists have moved from Brisbane to Sydney and Melbourne, and not only artists in every industry that happens, but it also happens from here, of course, to Brisbane or to Melbourne and Sydney, and also from smaller country towns. And that's a phenomenon that happens everywhere. How can you stop it? You can't. That's just the way it is, and I think it's part of it. But what you can do is acknowledge that these artists are from that, and I think that's an important part. If we look at our state galleries, that's the job of the state gallery too, to say these are artists from our state, and it's the same, and create an archive of artists from the state. So Queensland Centre of Photography try to do that with the photographic industry as well, but looking at the change, the great shift in photography, going from its purely being documentary photography into the art, and then really embracing that idea of conceptual photographic art practice in Queensland. And these are the works that come from Queensland, and then they were able to go further around Australia and be shown further around Australia and be placed next to it. And after a little while, it also became the other way around, where people down south heard about the Queensland Centre of Photography and then started engaging with us and started showing with us. Ben Allion, the 2 black and white works on the sides there. Deborah Powie, the 3 works next to each other there. Adelaide, Ben Allion in Sydney, and then the work right on the top with the light and their house, that's Mark Kimber. And Mark Kimber is actually showing in the middle of the work. That's a portrait of him by William Wilson. Took that photograph. That photograph was actually taken at Photo LA. He had a studio set up, and they are done with one of those really old processes, but I can't think of what it is anymore. Highly toxic. No, highly toxic. It's massive, like not even a 5.4, but plates that big. That's the size of the plate that he used. So really beautiful process. So yeah, there's yeah.
Okay, well, we'll end on that. If you can thank Henri with me and do stay on for coffee.